we're done with the scandal. We're done with, we looked at the scandal as Jesus scandalized Jerusalem. And we're going to move on. And so, Solomon, if you could throw up my title slide there, the first slide from the message. There we go. So, message for today is God's dwelling place. And if we recap, last week we saw that Jesus and his disciples, they reenact the ancient journey into the land of Canaan. And they go and they encounter the Canaanite woman. She comes there seeking a miracle from Jesus, and Jesus is initially silent. And in this silence, he leaves room for his disciples to speak. And they do. On the heels of Jesus' lesson that food cannot defile a person, our heart defiles us. And the words that our heart leads us to speak defiles us. On the heels of that lesson, the disciples go out, and as we talked about, the worst students ever, they go out and they defile themselves. They speak words out of their heart that presume that Jesus had no intention of giving this Canaanite woman a miracle. And they ask for Jesus to send her away. She's annoying us. Jesus, this is annoying. Send her away, please. Many take the subsequent engagement to be about Jesus and the woman. And the disciples are largely ignored, but we consider that Jesus engages the woman actually for the sake of his disciples. It is the education of his disciples that is the focus of the material that we are in, ever since the parables. And so his disciples learning is at the root of most things we're reading now. And Jesus 3 times answers in this conversation, but we looked at who is he answering. Only the last answer is directed to the woman. In his first answer, he verbalized the exclusionary hearts of his disciples. They want Jesus for themselves, only for the house of Israel. And this Canaanite woman is on the outside. And so Jesus says, well, of course, I was only sent to you guys, obviously, which is wrong. They should have picked up right away. No, he hasn't said that. In his second answer, Jesus shifted things a little bit, and he introduces the idea of a household hierarchy. It's a hierarchy between children and the household dog under the table. Jesus says that it's not fair for him to take what has been given to the children to steal from them to give to the dog. And we know that the first answer Jesus spoke is actually untrue. Jesus speaks an untruth. So we come to the second one, and it's a little bit harder to wrestle with. We know the first answer was untrue. He didn't come only for Israel. So we disagree with that one. But in the second one, do we agree with this answer or not? In the second answer, it's tricky, and it is intentional by a good rabbi to give this answer that invites our prejudices to come out. Jesus is offering the idea, okay, let's draw everybody in. But let's say that of those who are in, there's first class and second class. Some eat at the table and some eat under the table. Jesus' answer invites prejudices to come out. It sounds kind of good, it sounds kind of right, but maybe it isn't. On the disciples' side, automatically the answer is going to play, this second answer is going to play into the disciples their mindset of hierarchy, their mindset of status. And with the children being higher than the dogs, the disciples are going to presume themselves to be the children. And this woman's the dog. She's second class to our first class. But Jesus has made it so that their presumption gets flipped on its head. He's made it so that if they want to embrace the higher position, they're now the ones with the power of mercy. Because he says what this woman is seeking has been served to you. I won't take it back from you. If the disciples presume the Canaanite to be the dogs and the dog and for themselves to be the children, Jesus is saying the children have been served what the dog is looking for. It's not fair for me to take the children's food and give it to the dog, but there's nothing stopping the disciples from offering what they have been given. But the disciples remain silent. Perhaps it's because they're realizing that Jesus' second answer might be a little suspect. Maybe we aren't supposed to agree to this so quickly. On the woman's side, with the disciples always vying for status against others and among themselves, the question is, will this woman do the same? She doesn't fight. She doesn't work to ensure that she is recognized as one of the children. But neither does she accept the status of dog. Her response neutralizes status. The point of her response is, from high to low, everybody gets to eat what the master's serving up. She dismisses the invitation to argue over hierarchy, first and second class, and she latches on to where there's the equality. We all eat the same thing. We're all being served by the master. Her response disregards the position. She doesn't take upon herself the position of dog or the higher position of a child. She simply says, everybody in the house gets to eat what's being served, so serve me up. And Jesus declares her to be a woman of great faith, just like the Roman centurion. Notice what's in common between the Canaanite of great faith and the centurion of great faith. It is a refusal to fight or rest upon high position. Jesus' own disciples are still figuring this out. As they're mulling over the encounter with the Canaanite, they follow Jesus as he moves on, and he arrives at a mountain in the wilderness. And we're led to recall the First Testament time of Israel at Mount Sinai in the wilderness. Jesus as God just reenacted the first Exodus as 5,000 Jews followed him into the wilderness, 5,000 male Jews, and then there was women and children as well. Now Jesus as God is breaking new ground as Gentiles follow him into the wilderness to meet him at Mount Sinai, at a new mountain. It's in a Gentile exodus into the wilderness that we come to the feeding of the 4,000. From the feeding of the 5,000 to the feeding of the 4,000, we can entertain a lot of meanings between the two, comparing and contrasting them. And numbers meant a lot to the ancient world. And we can consider the meaning of numbers here. Jewish numerology is a lost art in Western literalism. Despite some significant theological differences with him, I reference theologian Bruner quite a bit as his commentary on Matthew has become one of my favorites. He leans Reformed and is therefore a little less mystical in his beliefs than I am. He stays fairly safe within the box of Reformed orthodoxy. But with the second feeding, he almost breaks out of his box. In looking at the feeding, he says, is allegorical exegesis of numbers credible anymore? For example, do the 4,000 point to the 4 points of the compass from which the Gentiles of the world will come to Jesus? Are the 7 baskets the 7 deacons in the service of Gentiles of Acts 6? Or the 7-fold grace of the Holy Spirit? Are the 5,000 the 5 books of the Torah? Are the 12 baskets of leftovers the 12 tribes? Although numerology was popular in the early church, we don't feel as comfortable with it today. Let's just stick with plain meanings. No. Dig deep. Get uncomfortable. He was so close. Reading just the surface of the text, it makes Matthew's gospel so much less than Matthew intended it to be. When we dive deep, we find the meaning that Matthew is running all through his writing. He's now, with the Gentiles, reenacting another Exodus. He's had multiple Exoduses now. Exodi, I don't know. Whatever's plural for Exoduses. He's writing of Davidic moments. He's writing of temple dynamics and all kinds of other stuff. Matthew grabs onto tons of First Testament passages and he dives deeply beneath their plain meaning. Matthew doesn't just read on the surface. Let's read the Bible like Matthew reads it. Let's read the Bible like Bruner said the early church read it. Let's at least take a pause at these numbers. In the first feeding, it consisted of Jews, and the numbers primarily revolved around the number 5 and the number 12. These are both important numbers to the Jews. 5 represents the Torah. 12 represents the tribes. In the second feeding, it consists of Gentiles now. And the focus is on the numbers 4 and 7. Relating particularly to the Gentiles, the number 4 does, as Bruner says, we might go there, but I'm scared. The number 4 looks to the 4 corners of the earth, where the Gentiles will come from. In fact, a little bit later in Matthew, Jesus is going to speak of gathering people from the 4 directions of the earth. And the number 7 refers to completeness. So with the Gentiles, we now find the number 7 prominent, completeness, possibly meaning that bringing in the Gentiles from the 4 corners of the earth is making God's people complete? I don't know. But the numbers invite us to think so much more deeply. So I read into the numbers. I read deeper than the surface here. As the story of the feeding of the 4,000 starts out, we read in Matthew 15:32. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days, 72 hours, and have eaten nothing. And I do not want to send them away hungry. They might pass out when they're trying to get home. The English here is really kind of cheesy, where Jesus says, I have compassion for them. I think that in our English, in our contemporary setting, we have been deadened to a degree with compassion fatigue. Compassion is just, oh, my heart goes out to that, and then my heart goes out to that, and I see so much stuff, and it's compassion, but there's not really this big deal with it. In the Greek, the term here for compassion, it really refers to a gut experience. It's something that we experience when we have deep empathy for someone suffering. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I have. It's the experience of seeing someone in such a state of need that you feel your guts twisting as your body feels it. The Greek term for compassion here is not just a feeling that I undergo. The Greek for compassion is connected to the word womb, the place on the inside out of which life is born. And this kind of compassion that Jesus is feeling, it is always one that moves someone to seek to give life, to birth life where it finds life dying or missing. The Greek term compassion speaks of the place in us that becomes impregnated with mercy and life when it is seeded through the observation of suffering. Ultimately, in the Greek, what Jesus is saying to his disciples is, the seed of these faithful people's suffering has impregnated the womb of my heart, and I wish to birth mercy and life to them. So Jesus tells the disciples that he wants to help the people. He wants to feed the people who have been with me now for 3 days without food. And the Greek that is translated here, been with me. It's not Jesus just simply saying, these people have been hanging out with me. We've been chilling on this camping trip. It's been great. It isn't a light sense of coexistence between Jesus and people. The Greek word speaks to Jesus saying that these Gentiles have held out with me. They have endured with me. As one commentary puts it, Jesus is saying, these Gentiles have persevered at my side. Been with me, persevered. This Greek word is the opposite of waver. These Gentiles have not wavered for 3 days. So these Gentiles have been faithfully attached to Jesus for 3 days without food on the heels of the great faith of a Canaanite woman. We are seeing scores of Gentiles that are demonstrating great faithfulness to Jesus. They are suffering to be with him. And it's in their ranks. It's from the Gentiles that the complaints of hunger in the wilderness are noticeably absent. At the last feeding with the Jews, it was on the first day in the wilderness that Jesus' own disciples raised the issue of hunger, and they told Jesus how to fix it. Among the Gentiles, we're not seeing this. But notice the disciples' improvement in this story. Now they have patiently waited with the uncomplaining, great faith Gentiles. They did not bring food up, apparently, on the first day this time. They've been waiting with the Gentiles for 3 days for Jesus to decide that the time is now right to act and provide. The Gentiles are learning. The disciples are learning. And it's only when Jesus tells them that he wants to feed the crowd that then the disciples ask him, where are we going to get enough bread? It says desert here, but this word is wilderness. So many times the word should be wilderness because it connects everything into wilderness. Where are we going to get enough bread in the wilderness to feed a crowd? Basically, the disciples are saying, we've been patient, waiting for you to make the choice. And now that you said we need to do something, okay, Jesus, we're in the wilderness, on a mountain, and can't get the food by human means. So where are we going to get them food? In response to Jesus, what the disciples' words really boil down to is, all right, Jesus, human means will not work here. So how do you want to do this? And I love it. I love to see the progression in the disciples. Gone is their assumption that Jesus can't or won't help. Now, quick is their admittance to their own limitations. And they're asking for their rabbi's guidance. How are we going to do this? Give us the answer. The disciples are learning, and someday, maybe, they will no longer be the worst students ever. The event with the Gentiles upon the mountain in the wilderness, it paints a beautiful picture for us to grab onto from the end of Exodus chapter 24 and moving into Exodus chapter 25. At the end of Exodus 24, we read that the glory of God settled onto Mount Sinai. And the glory of God was like a devouring fire. Well, here is Jesus. Hebrews tells us that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. And he has come with Gentiles, and he has settled on the mountain. So Jesus is the glory of God. It is a glory that is like devouring fire. And time again, Jesus has shown that the fire that burns within him is a fire of mercy. Time and again, Jesus sees people in need, and mercy burns within him. And we consider, just what is that devouring fire of mercy consuming? As one commentator puts it, the sacred fire of mercy is devouring every obstacle from nature or nurture that impedes the free flow of life and love between the Creator and his created. So Jesus is God upon the mountain. He is the glory of God on the mountain that's like a devouring fire. And it's a fire of mercy. And upon this mountain in Matthew 15, Jesus has been burning up, destroying, consuming the afflictions of the people, the things that impede life and love. The fire of mercy has been devouring physical and psychic impediments. And now the present obstacle is poverty. It's a lack. It's a lack of food, and he's going to deal with that. Going to Exodus 25, God tells Moses to take up a free offering from the people. No, nobody is forced to do this. It is a free offering from the people. And out of whatever the people give, that will make up the place where I will reside. That's what God says. That is where I will live with the people. In other words, way back in Exodus 25, God says he wants to be housed among his people. And he says that his house, the place he will live, his sanctuary, his place of existence with people will be within what is produced out of people's charity. Our charity, our mercy, it creates the sanctuary, the environment within which God comes to dwell with people. And because God is love, and he houses himself within what is produced through the loving actions of charity, our mercy, this means that when we are charitable, loving to those around us, we are creating sanctuary for God to live in. We're creating space through our charity for God's presence to live in our lives and to live with those around us. So just as people offered what they had in Exodus 25 to create an environment for the dwelling of God with people, just as people offered their stuff in Exodus 25, the disciples give up what little they had of some bread and some fish. They offer up what they have, and their charity builds a place for God to dwell with the Gentiles. Jesus establishes a place in the lives of each person there that is built with the charity of the disciples, meeting the charity of Jesus. And as the people depart, they now carry God from the mountain back to their homes. Through people's charity, a sanctuary has been built in people's hearts. And God is now housed with them in a house built by the love they experienced. There's so many threads running through this material, and I've attempted to touch on a few, and I invite you to study them out further for yourself. explore them more, but for now, as we close, and you'll hear the kids coming back, I want to draw our attention more closely to one critical theme that runs through the Canaanite woman and into the feeding of the 4,000. It is the theme of a heart that does not grasp for status or use position against others. Such a heart looks for where it is equal with others. It finds equality. And it is within such a heart that the compassionate womb of Jesus is replicated. And it's out of such a heart that love and life is birthed into this world. If you're fed up with the world, if you're frustrated by the way things are, the solution isn't found in power or politics. The solution is found in having a heart like we're looking at. This is a heart that is being devoured by the flaming glory of God. It is burning in and with his fire of mercy. This heart spreads charity into the world. And where there is charity, there is a sanctuary for God being built. Where there is charity, that is where people find God to be alive, living among them. So where we live out charity, we bring the divine into our world, and we expand the presence of God among his people, all his people, which is all humanity, even the Canaanites. It's through charity that we build God's dwelling place. I want to invite you to step into the fire of mercy. Let the things in you that you wish were not there, from your past to your present to what you see in the future, in the fire of mercy, let those things that you wish weren't in you, let them be devoured. Let them be devoured by the flames that burned upon the cross. As Jesus was lifted up,